So today we're going to be talking about practice routines, and in particular alternate picking practice routines that are going to be pretty useful to improve your technique and also just generally learn things a bit quicker. Because there's a lot of problems with how a lot of guitarists go about practicing and how they work it into their day and how they think about it, generally speaking. So I'm going to cover a few topics in this and also some recommendations to take away for the particular topic of alternate picking, but a lot of this stuff will apply to a lot of different things. One of the things I see a lot of guitarists doing, which is really stupid and often is going to end in just frustration and no actual physical gain, is something like this. Let's say they're doing some Paul Gilbert patterns and they do this. Over and over and over and over again. There's no breaks in the middle. There's nothing else. They just sort of practice that to a tempo of some kind. Now, I want you to do this with me. While I'm doing this, what is my brain actually focused on? You know, when I am doing that and when I'm trying to pick through all those patterns, you know, what is my brain focused on trying to improve here? Have I got something in mind, or am I just aimlessly hitting strings with the hope that eventually I will get better at it through some random act of God? And the answer is, for most people, they don't actually have anything in mind, or they don't have anything that they're working on. And this is really problematic because it means that even if you just keep speeding it up to the metronome, you're not really going to get any faster. You're not really going to get any cleaner with your technique because you're not really focused on any particular part of that. So you've got to take a pattern like that and you've got to really hyper focus on one point of it. Let's say, for example, it's the string change. So if I do this, let's say it's that top note. I'm just going to really focus on trying to get that top note clean. And I'm going to go much slower than I was before. So something like this. And I'm really just, all I'm thinking about, the rest of the lick does not matter. What matters is I want to hear that, I want to hear it clean, and I want to hear myself playing that really smoothly. So I'm really paying attention to one note in that pattern, which is really important because, again, that is just going to make you clean things up quicker. It might sound like it's slower if you do it one at a time. It's really not. Now, the other thing as well that's really important with this is do it slow. But don't necessarily change the velocity of which you're hitting the string. So sometimes when I tell people to do things slow, what they end up doing is sort of moving the pick really slowly. You can be light and relaxed and still make incredibly fast movements with the hand, and that's something you want to train. So if I'm playing this slow, I want it to look something like... Hopefully you can see what's going on there, where my picking hand is not moving slow. The wrist is moving quickly, but it's just at a slow tempo. So you're not getting used to this kind of idea of sort of like sliding your pick around the strings, and it's not very accurate and it's not precise playing those notes. Make sure the velocity is the same as when you're playing it at a high speed. That's really important. It just really gets you used to some of these things. Other things with this, if you're struggling with the fretting hand, a really good way of trying to work the fretting hand out is to try and focus on just playing one note at a time and making sure everything else leaves the fretboard. So I've only got one finger on at a time. And do something like that, where again, each finger is leaving the guitar. It's almost like the Alan Holdsworth legato way of doing all hammer-ons legato, where you that kind of thing. And that's, again, another excellent fretting hand exercise. If you haven't tried that one before, I highly recommend it. So the point here is that each repetition and run through of this that I'm doing, I'm trying to focus on some specific point. So if that, don't focus on speed. Speed is the most pointless thing to focus on because that's not going to get you anywhere. You will speed up if you start focusing on really specific things. So for example, if I am just focused on this, that note, then as soon as I get that clean, I'm going to have to listen to it again, and then maybe, for example, when I speed it up, I can't hear my little finger. This is really common with this kind of pattern. I can't hear that little finger sort of coming back onto the B string fast enough, so I might just practice that and only make sure that's in place. But you do it sort of piece by piece by piece by piece. Now, the other thing that I would recommend here is have about 3 ideas or 3 concepts on the go at the same time. So to give you an example of how this might work, if I'm really focused on my alternate picking, I want my alternate picking to be really good, I might do something like play through a 3-note per string scale and try and get that up to speed. And again, just focusing on one thing. Maybe it's just the upstroke on the string change, and really get that sounding clean. Or maybe it's just making sure that my fretting hand is able to play that cleanly, and again, focusing on that little finger and making sure that's going in the right place. And we're only doing one finger at a time. Okay, so that's another thing that we could add. And then the third one might be some kind of odd pattern. I really, really recommend practicing some odd numbered patterns. I've covered it in a previous video if you want to go and check that one. But something like pattern of 5. That is really good for your alternate picking dexterity because, again, it reverses the pick stroke every time it repeats. So you start on the downstroke 1 repetition and you start on the upstroke next. But basically, I've got these 3 things, and I might practice one of them for 2 or 3 minutes and really try and focus on getting that improved. And then I'm going to move on and do 2 or 3 minutes on the scalic one, and then I might move on and do 2 or 3 minutes on the 5-note pattern that's an odd numbered grouping. And I'm going to keep cycling these. Now, this is really important, and it's actually very heavily backed by a lot of scientific literature. Your brain does not learn things quicker if you just hyper-focus on one thing. What ends up happening is you get really, really good at that within if I spend 6 or 8 hours on one lick in a day, I might get better by the end of the day, but the next morning I will be significantly worse than I was the previous day. What instead you're doing by cycling these things is you're training your brain to sort of forget and remember what it was doing over and over and over again. And that actually trains the long-term memory to sort of hold these things a little bit better than just playing one lick over and over again until you get it right. So I'm always a big fan of cycling concepts like this. And, if you're working on alternate picking, which again, you should only pick one big concept to work on at a time. If your picking hand's crap, then just try and focus on that. Don't worry about harmonic stuff. Don't worry about composition and all these kind of things. That can come another time. Or, you could pick one of those first. And then again, within that concept, you might be cycling 3 or 4 different things. So if I was doing a chord practice, I might focus on my triads and just try and work out where some of these triads are and make sure those are sounding all right. And then I might do something on 7 chords, all the inversions of those, and then I might do something on just interval practice and just making sure I can pick out flat 7, major 7, and then flat 3rd, etc., and just be able to know where all my intervals are if I'm working on in a harmonic context. But again, even with that, just because it's not a technical exercise does not mean I shouldn't be constantly cycling certain ideas round and round and round. Again, it's a good way of thinking about this is sort of thinking about it a little bit like a gym session. You can't just go to the gyms and then just hit biceps for 5 exercises in a row because that's not actually going to it's just going to fatigue you more than anything. It's not going to do what you want it to do, and you will actually sort of make progress slower by hyper focusing on one thing like that. But if you do a general sort of, push, pull, leg sort of thing, that is going to be better because, again, you're cycling things on and off with the exercises, so you're giving certain muscles the time to recover, and that's more of a physical thing, but there's a lot of parallels with how the brain learns things and how the body physically adapts to things like that, which is very interesting, but something to really think about with your playing. Don't try and overcomplicate it either. Don't try and do in the same vein of things. If you go to the gym and you go and do 7, 8 different body parts at one go, and you just don't really end up with the same sort of focus, and everything's all over the place. And that's why I think like three or four sort of different ideas is a really good place to start. Now, in terms of actually getting through a practice session, then, if I spend, let's say, 5 minutes on one and I've got like 3 or 4 ideas, my practice session is a grand total of 20 minutes. And if I do those 20 minutes, like, I find as many times in a day as I can do it. So ideally, you want to be doing that, like 4 or 5 times a day sort of thing. But if you don't have the time, at least do it once or twice a day, and every single day. Again, that's the really important part. The consistency of how often you do this is way more important than how long the session is. That's another thing that a lot of sort of beginners and intermediates don't get right, is they sort of practice for like, 3 hours on one weekend. And that does absolutely shit all for your playing, because you are not using the brain in the way it should be used. If instead you do, let's say, 20 minutes a day every single day of the week, you will just be a better player. And there's no arguments against that. That's just how it works. So don't be this person who's sort of like a weekend warrior with it and just only practices on the weekend or does things like that. But again, keep your practice sessions super simple. 3 or so exercises or 3 or so ideas within what you want to learn. Pick a topic and work on a topic for like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months. I had to work on alternate picking for about 6 months a couple of years ago. Just that, nothing else, just to try and get my picking hand up to scratch, because it was the weakest part of my playing. I didn't do any practice of any other topics, and I think that actually really helped me sort of fine tune that to a point where it's now a major part of my playing. So don't overcomplicate it. Don't expect really fast results, but keep it super consistent and rotate topics like that. Hopefully that's been useful. And if it has, then leave a comment and I will catch you in the next one.